The black man sat in silence as the racist officer swore under oath, telling lie after lie. The jury listened. The judge listened. But then, one revelation stopped everything. The cop's face turned pale, his confidence shattered. And when the truth finally hit the courtroom, his entire life collapsed before everyone's eyes. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. Not the kind of silence that brought peace, but the kind that carried tension so thick you could feel it pressing against your chest. Malcolm Hayes sat at the defendant's table, hands clenched together so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His pulse pounded in his ears, but his face remained calm. He had learned long ago that showing emotion as a black man in a courtroom could be dangerous. Across from him, Officer Daniel Briggs sat on the witness stand, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But his words were anything but clean. "I saw the defendant fleeing the scene," Briggs said, his voice firm, unwavering. "He was aggressive, resisting arrest. We found stolen merchandise in his vehicle." Lies. Every word of it. Malcolm's mother, seated behind him, stifled a quiet sob. She knew her son. He wasn't perfect, but he sure as hell wasn't a criminal. She had raised him to be respectful, to keep his head down, to survive in a world that never wanted to see him win. And yet, here he was, fighting for his freedom, while a racist cop twisted reality right in front of their eyes. The prosecutor nodded along with Briggs, barely even questioning his testimony. It was routine, expected. Another black man, another guilty verdict waiting to happen. But Malcolm's lawyer, Vanessa Carter, wasn't having it. She rose from her chair, heels clicking against the marble floor, her eyes burning with restrained fury. "Officer Briggs," she began, her voice smooth but sharp. "Are you absolutely certain of what you saw that night?" Briggs exhaled sharply. "I wouldn't be testifying under oath if I wasn't, ma'am." Malcolm didn't flinch, but inside, rage burned. He had been at home that night. He had proof. But the system wasn't built to listen to people like him. It was built to believe people like Briggs. Vanessa took a slow step closer. "You say my client resisted arrest. Did your body camera capture this?" Briggs hesitated. "It was malfunctioning." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Malcolm shut his eyes for a brief second. Of course. Convenient. But what Briggs didn't know, the next 5 minutes would change everything. Because the truth wasn't just coming. It was about to crash down on him so hard, he would never recover. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the judge, who had barely looked up from his notes, finally glanced at Officer Briggs. His body cam was malfunctioning. How convenient. Malcolm inhaled slowly, pressing his hands flat against the cold table in front of him. He knew how this played out. The words of a police officer, especially a white one, would always hold more weight than a black man's truth. Vanessa, however, wasn't rattled. She took another step forward, her heels deliberately slow against the floor, letting the tension build. "Officer Briggs," she repeated, tilting her head slightly. "Your body camera malfunctioned. How unfortunate." Briggs nodded, but there was a flicker of something in his expression. Just for a second. A crack. Malcolm saw it. So did Vanessa. "Well," Vanessa continued, sliding a paper onto the evidence table, "it's a good thing you weren't the only officer on duty that night." Briggs's face twitched. "We pulled the footage from Officer Grant's body cam," Vanessa said, her voice like silk. Controlled, sharp. Funny thing, his camera worked just fine. A sharp murmur spread through the courtroom. Malcolm's mother let out a quiet gasp, gripping the arms of her seat. She had spent her whole life preparing her son for this moment, for a fight he never should have had to fight in the first place. But maybe, just maybe, the tides were turning. Briggs stiffened. His once relaxed posture shifted, his hand twitching slightly against his pant leg. Vanessa let the moment stretch, her eyes locked onto him. "Would you like me to play the footage, Officer Briggs?" The silence in the courtroom became suffocating. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Judge Reynolds finally sat up straighter, folding his hands in front of him. Briggs swallowed. I don't see how that's necessary." But it was already too late. Vanessa turned, giving a slight nod to the courtroom technician. The screen in the front of the courtroom flickered to life. Briggs's face turned pale. And then, the truth spilled out for everyone to see. The screen lit up, and suddenly, the entire courtroom was watching. Malcolm's heart pounded as the footage began to play. The grainy image from Officer Grant's body camera came into focus. The setting was clear. A quiet neighborhood street, dimly lit by flickering street lamps. It was the night Malcolm had been arrested. Vanessa crossed her arms, watching Briggs carefully. He was shifting now, his confidence cracking like thin ice under pressure. The recording played. At first, the audio was filled with static and background chatter from the police radio. Then, clear as day, Briggs's voice rang through the speakers. "That's him right there, black hoodie, hands in his pockets, looks suspicious as hell." A beat of silence filled the courtroom. The air inside was thick. Malcolm closed his eyes. He remembered that night. He had been walking home from a friend's house. Nothing more. But in Briggs's eyes, that had been enough. On the video, another officer's voice came through. Officer Grant's. "Briggs, slow down. That guy's just walking." "Don't be soft, Grant." Briggs interrupted, his voice laced with arrogance. "They always act innocent. Watch this." Malcolm's mother let out an audible gasp. A few jurors exchanged nervous glances. Even the judge's expression darkened. But the worst was yet to come. On screen, Briggs stepped out of the patrol car. The footage showed Malcolm, wearing headphones, completely unaware of what was coming. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was just existing. Briggs's voice echoed again. "Hey, hands where I can see them." Malcolm's image on the screen turned, startled. "What? Before he could even finish, the video showed Briggs grabbing him, slamming him against the hood of the patrol car. The sound of Malcolm groaning in pain filled the room. And then, the most damning part of all, Briggs leaned close to Malcolm's ear. The mic on Grant's vest picked it up clearly. "You move an inch, boy, and I'll make sure you don't walk away from this." The courtroom erupted. A collective gasp. Someone in the back cursed under their breath. Malcolm's mother clutched her chest, shaking her head. Briggs's face had gone completely white. Vanessa let the video play just a few seconds longer, just enough to show there was no resisting. No stolen merchandise. No crime. Just a man walking home, and an officer who saw his skin as a weapon. Then, she turned to the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice razor-sharp, "the prosecution has built this case entirely on the testimony of this officer. An officer who not only lied under oath, but was caught on video using threats and excessive force on an innocent man." She turned back to Briggs, whose hands were now visibly shaking. "Tell me, Officer Briggs," she said, voice dripping with steel. "Do you still stand by your statement?" The courtroom fell into a dead silence. All eyes were on Briggs, and in that moment, everyone knew. His life had just collapsed in real time. Briggs's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He looked trapped, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, with nowhere to go. His once steady hands gripped the wooden railing of the witness stand so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Everyone was waiting. Malcolm's heart hammered in his chest, his fists still clenched beneath the table. This was it. This was the moment that could either break him, or finally set him free. Vanessa took a slow step closer. "I'll ask again, Officer Briggs," she said, her voice like a knife cutting through the thick air. "Do you still stand by your statement?" Briggs opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His lips parted, his jaw tightened, but the words never formed. Malcolm could see the sweat forming at his temple, the way his chest rose and fell with shaky breaths. The man was cornered. The judge leaned forward, his expression now one of deep concern. "Officer Briggs," Judge Reynolds said, his voice laced with authority, "I remind you, you are under oath." Briggs's fingers twitched. His leg bounced slightly under the stand. He glanced toward the prosecution table, but no one came to his defense. Even the prosecutor, who had been so eager to paint Malcolm as a criminal, was sitting frozen, lips pressed into a thin line. He knew. They all knew. Briggs licked his lips, his face now completely pale. His voice cracked. He tried to regain composure, but it was useless. Vanessa didn't move, didn't blink. She waited. The weight of his lie was crushing him in real time. And then, he broke. I might have, he stammered. His eyes darted toward the screen where his own voice, his own damning words, still echoed in everyone's ears. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "You might have..." "What?" Briggs swallowed again. His breathing turned shallow. Malcolm's pulse pounded as he watched the moment unfold. A long pause. His eyes flicked around the courtroom, the jury, the judge, the spectators. He had no way out. Briggs dropped his head. I lied, he finally whispered. The courtroom exploded. Gasps, murmurs, even a shocked, "What the hell?" from someone in the back. Malcolm heard his mother sob, this time not from fear, but from relief. Vanessa nodded once, as if she had expected it all along. "Speak up, Officer Briggs," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What exactly did you lie about?" Briggs exhaled sharply, his body visibly shaking now. He looked like a man watching his entire life burn to the ground in front of him. He squeezed his eyes shut, as if hoping this was just a bad dream. But when he reopened them, nothing had changed. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it now. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I lied about everything." A woman in the back gasped. A juror shook his head in disgust. Judge Reynolds' expression darkened. "Are you telling this court that you knowingly falsified your testimony?" Briggs flinched. His career was over. "Yes, Your Honor," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Vanessa inhaled deeply, looking at the judge. "Your Honor, given this officer's admission, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." Judge Reynolds didn't hesitate. Motion granted. Malcolm's entire body went numb. It was over. The guards at his side stepped back. The tension that had been gripping his muscles for weeks, for years, began to unravel. His mother broke down in quiet sobs behind him. Malcolm turned, his eyes burning as he met her gaze. He was free. Free. But this wasn't the end. Because what happened next? That was the part no one saw coming. The courtroom was in chaos. Murmurs turned into heated whispers. The sound of shuffling feet filled the air. And somewhere in the back, a reporter frantically typed on a laptop. Malcolm sat completely still, the words "motion granted" still ringing in his ears. It was over. His mother, tears rolling down her cheeks, clasped her hands together as if in silent prayer. For months, she had been preparing herself for the worst. For years, she had been preparing Malcolm for moments like this. But nothing had prepared her for the moment her son walked free. Vanessa gave Malcolm's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, but her job wasn't done. Because Briggs, he wasn't walking away from this. Judge Reynolds was livid. He removed his glasses, exhaling slowly, his face unreadable. But the sharpness in his eyes, that was pure disgust. "Officer Briggs," the judge said, his tone steady, but dangerously controlled. "I don't think you fully grasp the gravity of what just happened." Briggs still had his head down. His shoulders were slumped, his entire body trembling. The once powerful officer who had spoken with so much authority, who had lied under oath without a second thought, now looked like a broken man. The prosecutor, who had so confidently backed Briggs, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He looked embarrassed, exposed. "Your Honor," Vanessa's voice rang through the room, "I formally request that Officer Briggs be charged with perjury and misconduct. He deliberately falsified evidence, lied under oath, and nearly sent an innocent man to prison based on nothing but racial bias and abuse of power. If Malcolm Hayes had not had competent legal counsel, he would be in jail right now, for nothing." The tension snapped. Someone in the gallery muttered, "Damn right." Judge Reynolds nodded once, firm, decisive. "Officer Daniel Briggs," the judge said, leaning forward, "I am ordering an immediate review of your actions, and I will personally be recommending formal charges against you." Briggs's face drained of all color. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I am ordering an immediate investigation into the department's handling of this case." He turned his gaze to the now very nervous prosecutor. "And that includes the district attorney's office." Malcolm saw the prosecutor's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. His entire case had just crumbled, and now his own reputation was on the line. Briggs finally lifted his head, his face a mess of sweat and panic. "Your Honor, please," he stammered. I made a mistake." Judge Reynolds did not blink. "Mistake?" His voice was colder now, sharper. "You nearly destroyed an innocent man's life. You abused your badge, and you walked into my courtroom believing you could get away with it." Briggs had no response. "Officer Briggs," the judge said, voice unwavering, "you are hereby held in contempt of court. Bailiff, escort him out of my courtroom." The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, reporters scrambling to take notes. 2 court officers approached Briggs, placing firm hands on his arms. He flinched, looking around wildly as if someone, anyone, would save him. But there was no one left to protect him. As they pulled him to his feet, his eyes met Malcolm's. For the first time in this entire trial, Malcolm saw something in them that had never been there before. Fear. Briggs's lips parted, but Malcolm said nothing, because in this moment, justice was speaking for itself. The guards led Briggs out of the courtroom as the murmurs swelled. His head was bowed. His confidence was shattered. The man who had once held all the power now had nothing. Malcolm took a deep breath, the weight on his chest finally lifting. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning, because after today, the whole damn system was about to feel the consequences. Malcolm stepped outside the courthouse and felt the sun on his face for the first time in what felt like years. The air was thick, heavy, charged with an energy he could barely describe. It wasn't peace. Not yet. It wasn't victory, because what had been taken from him could never truly be returned. But it was something. A crowd had gathered on the courthouse steps. Reporters, activists, community members. Some had come for the trial. Others had simply heard whispers of what had happened inside. The second Malcolm emerged, the murmurs turned into cheers. His mother clutched his hand tightly, tears still shining in her eyes. "You're free, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're free." Malcolm nodded, swallowing hard. He felt it, but at the same time he didn't, because freedom shouldn't have come at this cost. Vanessa stepped beside him, her expression unreadable. "They're going to want a statement," she murmured, motioning toward the line of reporters waiting. Microphones poised, cameras rolling. Malcolm exhaled. A month ago, he wouldn't have imagined himself standing here, with people chanting his name, with his face plastered all over the news. A month ago, he had been nothing but a case number, another black man fighting against a system that had never been designed to protect him. And yet, Briggs had been escorted out in handcuffs. The prosecutor's career was now under scrutiny, and the entire police department was being investigated for corruption. This wasn't just about him anymore. Malcolm stepped forward, Vanessa at his side. The crowd hushed as he took a deep breath. "This isn't just my story," he said, his voice steady, though his chest still ached with the weight of everything. "This is the story of every black man who's been lied on, every mother who's had to pray her son comes home, every family who's had to watch the system destroy someone they love." The crowd murmured in agreement. "I shouldn't have had to fight for the truth," Malcolm continued. "The truth should have always been enough. But the truth didn't matter. Not until a camera caught it. Not until someone like Vanessa Carter was willing to stand up and fight back. Not until people demanded accountability." He paused, his hands shaking slightly as he clenched them at his sides. "And that should scare every single one of you." The air was thick with tension now, the weight of his words hanging over everyone. "I walked into that courtroom an innocent man," he said, "and I walked out an innocent man. But what if there hadn't been footage? What if Briggs had gotten away with his lies?" He let the question sink in. "How many more are sitting in prison right now?" he continued, "because they weren't lucky enough to have proof?" A few heads nodded. A woman in the front wiped a tear from her eye. "This isn't over," Malcolm said, his voice firm now. "Not for me. Not for my community. This isn't just about one corrupt cop or one bad case. This is about a system built to protect men like Briggs and destroy men like me." The crowd erupted. People cheered. Some chanted his name. Vanessa gave him a small, approving nod. "You ready for what comes next?" she asked quietly. Malcolm turned to her. For the first time since his nightmare began, he felt ready, because the fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. The next morning, Malcolm woke up to his phone buzzing non-stop. Texts, missed calls, emails. His name was everywhere. The video of Officer Briggs lying under oath had gone viral overnight. News stations replayed it again and again, breaking down every second of the footage. Breaking news. Police officer caught falsifying evidence in courtroom, now facing criminal charges. Protests erupt across the city after officer exposed for lying under oath. Innocent black man nearly sent to prison. How many more have been framed? Malcolm scrolled through the comments under news articles and Twitter threads. The anger was palpable. People were furious, not just at Briggs, but at the entire system that had let this happen. How many innocent black men are in prison because their body cams malfunctioned, too? This is sick. Briggs should be in jail, not just fired. Jail. This is why we don't trust the system. This. A sharp knock at the door pulled Malcolm from his phone. His mother peeked inside, her eyes still swollen from last night's tears. "Someone's here to see you," she said. Malcolm hesitated, then slowly made his way to the living room. Vanessa stood at the door, arms crossed, phone in hand. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, a man in a dark suit, grey hair, sharp eyes, a briefcase in hand, stepped forward. "Malcolm Hayes?" he asked. Malcolm nodded, feeling his muscles tense. "Who's asking?" The man extended a business card. "United States Department of Justice. I'm here to talk about Briggs and your case." The room went still. Malcolm took the card, but didn't look away. "Why now?" he asked. "Why do you care all of a sudden?" The man sighed, shifting slightly. "Because the world is watching," he admitted. "Because we've received, let's just say, an overwhelming number of complaints about similar cases." Vanessa exhaled sharply. "So you're telling me this isn't just about Briggs?" The man hesitated. Then, finally, he nodded. "Number. It's bigger than Briggs." Malcolm's jaw tightened. His story had started as one case, one crooked cop, one courtroom lie. But now? It was a reckoning. The press conference spread like wildfire. Within hours, Malcolm's story was all over the news. Headlines screamed, "Officer lies under oath, caught on camera. Innocent black man nearly sent to prison. Corrupt cop exposed. Systemic racism in law enforcement." This trial just changed everything. Social media exploded. The body cam footage was everywhere, shared millions of times. People dissected every word, every lie, every brutal moment when Malcolm had been slammed against the car for existing. But while the world was waking up to what had happened, Malcolm was still processing. Sitting in his mother's small living room, staring at the TV as pundits debated his case, he felt hollow. "How are you feeling?" Vanessa asked, sitting across from him. Malcolm exhaled. "I don't know." His mother set a cup of tea in front of him, her eyes soft but knowing. "Baby, you went through hell. It's okay if you don't have the words yet." Malcolm nodded, but his mind raced. The truth had saved him, but how many others hadn't been saved? How many more Briggs types were still out there, lying, manipulating, getting away with it? And then, his phone rang. An unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something told him to answer. "Hello?" A deep, hesitant voice came through. "Mr. Hayes." Malcolm frowned. "Who is this?" A pause. Then, "My name is Anthony Shaw. I'm an inmate at Everglade Correctional. I saw your trial. The voice cracked. "I think the same thing happened to me." Malcolm sat up straight. His heart slammed in his chest. Vanessa's eyes locked onto his. "What is it?" she mouthed. Malcolm's grip tightened on the phone. Because in that moment he knew. Briggs wasn't the only one. And if Malcolm had nearly lost his freedom over a lie, how many others were still sitting in a cell, waiting for the truth to come too late? The next morning, Malcolm walked into Vanessa's office with a mission. "We have to do more," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "Briggs wasn't alone in this. I want to look into every case he's ever touched. Every arrest, every statement, every conviction." Vanessa didn't hesitate. "I already started." She slid a thick file across the desk. Malcolm opened it, his stomach twisting as he read the names. Briggs had been an officer for 15 years. That meant 15 years of unchecked power. 15 years of men like Malcolm thrown into a system that didn't care if they were innocent. Malcolm clenched his jaw. "We're blowing this wide open." The next few weeks were a storm. A civil rights attorney joined Malcolm's team, determined to bring a class action lawsuit against Briggs and the department. Multiple former inmates came forward, claiming they had been wrongfully convicted based on Briggs's lies. The DA's office launched a full investigation, leading to even deeper corruption being exposed. And then, the final blow came. Breaking news. Former officer Daniel Briggs arrested Malcolm, watched the footage with cold satisfaction. Briggs, in an orange jumpsuit, being led into the very system he once manipulated. Poetic justice. But Malcolm wasn't celebrating. Because this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something bigger. Because Briggs was just one man. And Malcolm, he was coming for the whole damn system.